So the rule of thumb was we needed 2 that were actually touching so you could get a good grip on that. Now after, might let them shoot off. Yeah, they're supposed to be done now, but that's alright.
Bad boys. Want to play.
Yeah, so after you rip the top of that cartridge off, you spit it away, you take some powder, and you pour it into what's called the pan, and that acts as my primer. So when I mentioned that flint strikes the steel, the sparks that are created between those two fall down into that pan where I put that prime. And that prime ignites, and it burns very quickly, and it travels through a really tiny hole in the side of the barrel, which then hits the main charge that I'm about to put down there. So once it's primed, I close that prison, I bring the musket down in front of me, I take all that's left of this cartridge, so all the powder that's in there, the ball if there was one, would also be thrown in there with the paper as well. I would throw it all down the barrel, and then I'm going to, once I get it in, I reach for my ramrod here, take that out, send all that stuff down to the bottom of the barrel, pack it in nice and tight to make sure it's not going anywhere, and then I'm going to bring my ramrod back. And now before I bring this back up to my shoulder, I'm also taught to give it a quick tap with my right pinky. Now all that does is it signals to myself that I actually put this ramrod back where it belongs. Because it's very easy out there in the heat of the battle, it gets kind of hectic. You might forget, you might leave your ramrod down the barrel, you might bring it back up to your shoulder, and you might fire your musket with your ramrod down your barrel. Now, while that might make an excellent projectile, you might see the ramrod fly across the battlefield and maybe stab through a couple guys on the other side. I would unfortunately have to walk across that battlefield and politely ask to have my ramrod back because I would no longer be able to reload if I did do that. So this quick tap is just me saying to myself, I'll be able to fire again after this. So once that's done, the musket comes up to my shoulder, and that's the end of the reload process. All those steps to fire a single shot. So the same person who ordered me to load is going to also order me to fire. Now those commands, the first one I'm going to wait for is to make ready. And when I hear make ready, the musket comes in front of my body like this. There's a count of 2, 3, and on 3 I'm going to pull the hammer back until I hear a nice loud click. So once I pull that back, I feel that click, I hear that click. That then tells me that this is off safety. So at this point I can fire. I'm going to wait till they stop shooting. Maybe not. All right, then I'm going to wait till I hear the command to present the musket, in which I aim towards the enemy, and then everyone's favorite command is fire. I pull that trigger. Now, when I pull that trigger, I cross my fingers a little bit because this weapon comes with a 30% misfire rate. So out of every 10 shots, only 7 of them will actually go off. Those other 3, you're going to hear that click that we all just heard, which signifies that a misfire has occurred. Now, the misfires were really common, mostly due to the lock mechanism here. The flint and the steel, they actually had to, the flint had to be sharp enough to dig into that steel and actually tear pieces of it off to create that spark. Now also this weapon is very susceptible to the elements, so rain, wind comes by, blows those sparks away, the rain gets in the lock, turns the powder into mush, doesn't burn properly. Once again, you're going to have a misfire, the musket's not going to go off. Now also, the inside of this barrel here is completely smooth, so it's a smooth bore weapon. It lacks rifling, which very conveniently James has here. He is carrying a rifle. He represents a member of the Lincoln Militia, volunteer ally for the British. We see this white armband on his left arm, and that signals to me that he's actually on my side. I'm not going to shoot him. Now, he does have a rifle, like I mentioned. The difference between the 2 weapons here, his barrel is a little bit thicker. It's a little bit smaller bore, like we mentioned earlier. 45 caliber, thank you. And now inside this barrel too, you're gonna find like carvings, like a helix staircase almost, that's carved on the inside of that barrel. And what that does is it grips that ammunition or that ball, and it gives it a spin as it goes out. Now his was much more accurate than mine. Being a smooth bore weapon, my effective accuracy with this particular brown vest was only about 75 yards. So about here to that corner bastion over there was my absolute maximum effective range with one of these things. That was pretty much the limit that I could expect to hit a man-sized target. Whereas James here with his rifle could reach out and hit people up to about 300 yards. So about here to the front gate that we all walked in on our way in, that was your effective range with a rifle. So much superior in accuracy, but they were much more expensive to produce, and they took a lot longer to actually reload. They were much slower in the reloading process. a clean rifle, you could load one of those about one time every 25-30 seconds, and then as you keep firing, you have this buildup occurring inside the barrel, which makes it a lot harder to actually drive that ball down, and you exponentially increase your reload time upwards to about a minute. Yeah. Okay, but enough said. We're gonna walk back onto the range here, and we're gonna fire for everyone here today. So James is gonna go first. He's gonna load and fire his rifle twice, and then I'll go out there after he's done doing that. It is a bit louder down at this end of the bench that way, so it is quite loud, especially the rifle. If you want to plug yours, I would recommend it.
Basically what I am is your 1812 sniper. My job was to pick off the enemy officers, causing confusion in their ranks.
You're gonna put, look.
Put your hand on your ears.
Yep.
Go down? Okay. Interne, hein? Attention.
All right, a quick round of applause for James.
Can we hear some of those commands too?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first shot I'm going to fire, I'm going to talk about actually what I'm doing as well, go through that reload process again, and then the second shot, I'm going to try and just go as fast as I can and hit the 15-second benchmark that all the soldiers were required to make. Yeah, so the commands, like you mentioned, if I were standing in line, I'd wait till I hear the command to prime and load. So on prime and load, musket comes in front of me, under my right arm, I flip that metal frizzen open, I reach back, I grab a round out, I bite off the top. Now that I can pour some powder in the pan, I'm then going to bring my musket down in front of me, pour that down the barrel, wait for the command to ram down cartridge, ram that down, pack it in nice and tight, put that ramrod back where it belongs, and then I'm going to be told to shoulder arms. So I shoulder arms, back up. Now those commands for firing again would be to make ready, 2, 3, present, and fire. All right, so when we were both out there too, you might have noticed just how obnoxious these things are. They're really loud and they create a ton of smoke. Now all that smoke is actually partially why I'm wearing the uniform that I am wearing. So you might think I'm crazy wearing this bright red jacket and these bright shoot me right here cross belts that I have on and the tall shiny hats, but this was actually a way to identify who was on your side out there on the battlefield. Because the way you made these weapons effective was by firing in a style called linear tactics, where you line up all your soldiers in a big long line, and you load and you fire together, all together at the same time. Now when you have two lines exchanging fire for a extended amount of time, you're creating a ton of smoke out there on the battlefield, and then you add artillery into that equation, and it's even more smoke. So the red jacket cut through the smoke really nicely. It was quite easy to say mix up a green jacket with a blue jacket out there in the smoke. So the red jacket allows us to eliminate as much friendly fire as possible. Now also, along with your musket, you're issued a secondary weapon, and mine being the 17-inch triangular socketed bayonet. It locks onto the end of my musket like that.
Nice.
But James here, being a volunteer, being a militiaman, oftentimes was a hunter. So we see he was more at free rein to bring in whatever he deemed effective in close range. So you have this nice large hunting knife here, as well as a tomahawk. Now, this triangular socketed bayonet, it's stuck on the end of my musket. It goes around the outside of the barrel, so I can actually load and fire while this is on there. Now, it is also triangular shaped. So that was actually one of the main reasons why this weapon was so feared. The triangular shaped blade meant that if you were stabbed by one of these things, it left a really gruesome triangular shaped puncture wound in your body. And they really couldn't deal with those types of wounds too well with the medicine at the time. Oftentimes they would try and stitch that wound closed, and that third side of the puncture wound was simply too much pressure for those stitches, and they would burst and you'd keep bleeding. Now, you couple that with the fact that no one said I had to clean this thing, so it's covered in rust, it's covered in mud, it's covered in grime, dirt, blood, all kinds of fun stuff. So you'd have a very nasty infection that were also to follow. You could consider yourself a little bit fortunate if you actually had a wound from one of these to the arm or leg, because there was something they could do, and that was take that limb off. They could amputate that limb for you. You'd go down on the battlefield, you get dragged back to the nearest surgeon's tent, and he's waiting there with his bone saw in his hand, and he'll take care of that limb nice and quickly, patches you up, and he sends you on your way. And then you cross your fingers that you actually live long enough to receive the pension you were promised when you first signed up at the beginning of your 7 to 21 year enlistment. So on that cheery note, that's the end of the musket demonstration. If you guys have a question or anything like that, don't hesitate to come on up and ask us. Also, if you want a photo, by all means, come right on up. If you want just a closer look at the musket too, by all means, come on up. And just so you know, the fort is closing at 5 o'clock. And I thank you very much for coming out to both Fort George and to our musket demonstration.
Thank you very much. Oh, I'm gonna bet.
Yeah.